Hello and welcome to the Witness History Podcast from the BBC World Service, with me, Ben Henderson. Now, you've probably heard of the Titanic, but far less famous is the sinking of the SS Tilawa, an ocean steamship sometimes called the Indian Titanic. On the 23rd of November 1942, in the middle of the Second World War, the ship was carrying more than 950 passengers and crew from India to East Africa when disaster struck.
It was a full moon, saw the boat sinking, and from the boat, a lot of people also died and fall in the water. And they were floating, bodies in the moonlight. The clothes and everything was spreading around like a flower.
Hundreds died. Families were torn apart. I've been speaking to the last two known survivors.
Well, my name is Arvindbhai Jani, and my age is 83 and a half. But don't tell anybody, please.
And could you tell me why in 1942 you were on board the SS Tilawa?
My father was in Africa. I was only 3 and a half, and I was with my mother. She was a very friendly woman. She would help anybody in the neighborhood or anytime in the kitchen.
Another passenger on board was a young girl called Tejparkash Manget.
Every 4 years, we went to India. 3 brothers, mother and father, and myself.
And how old were your brothers and yourself?
My brother, the youngest, was 7 years old. The eldest 2 brothers, 12 and 14. I was 9 years old.
It's the early hours of the 23rd of November. The Tilawa is chugging through the Indian Ocean. It's a peaceful night, and the moonlight is shimmering brightly on the water. The nearest land is the Seychelles, nearly 1,000 miles to the southwest. Arvind is with his mother below deck.
It was during the night, and she heard some sort of bombing. Because of the bomb, the ship shook very much and slowly started sinking.
The ship had been struck by a torpedo fired by a Japanese submarine. The country had sided with the Nazis in the Second World War against the Allies. Arvind's mother desperately scrambled to find the lifeboat.
She can't carry any luggage, but she carried me and she tied me up in a shawl at the back, so that she had free hands. And then slowly from the rope she came down to the lifeboat. They were allowing about 15 to 20 people, and in the boat there were some biscuits they give and some water.
Meanwhile, Tej was still on the ship.
I heard my father was calling my name. Then I felt the water was everywhere. And then he said, "Give me your hand." He lifted me up and take me to the lifeboat. And my father said, "I'm going back looking for my brothers, and I will come soon." When my father put me on the lifeboat, we lowered down and started sailing. I saw that people were screaming and crying. I looked up to the ship. I was waiting for my father. It was a full moon when we heard a big bang. It was the second torpedo, and I saw that black smoke, and the ship sank.
And just to clarify, when this ship sank, you were in a lifeboat away from the ship, and your father is still on the ship with brothers?
Father still there, yeah. My father went back, and he couldn't find my brother. Then he came back, and he was holding the railing, and first he thought he will jump, but he didn't. Then when the second torpedo hit, he went down with the ship. And he was going down and down. And he was thinking, "Please God, save me." All of a sudden, he comes up. And he starts swimming, and then he got the raft. Then he jumped on the raft and he saved himself.
Meanwhile, Tej was floating on the lifeboat for an entire day, a tiny speck in the vast Indian Ocean. But at long last, Tej and Arvind were picked up by a British warship. According to the Tilawa 1942 campaign group, 678 people survived, while 280 died. But what about the rest of Tej's family?
So next day when we were on the upper deck looking for the people who is coming, that day my father didn't come. The second day I saw my father was coming. I was so happy, and he came and died. Yeah, again, I'm sorry. He helped me, and he looked around. Maybe he was looking for my mother.
And did you try to locate your mother and brothers over the weeks and months that followed?
Yeah, my father, he started writing letters to the Red Cross. Once my mother's name he heard on the radio, then he was so happy. He said, I find your mother. But after the second day, that was another lady who lived in Malaysia or somewhere. Then he started crying. The first time I saw him crying.
Tej never saw her mother and brothers again. After the rescue, the passengers were dropped back in Mumbai. Arvind and his mother, who he calls Bar, travelled to their village near the town of Jodhia on the west coast of India.
Ba just wrote a letter to say that we were alive and saved, and that letter somehow didn't reach. See, when we arrived in Jodhia, the people were taken 13 days mourning, thinking that we are definitely part of the death in the ship. We are not survived.
Arvind and his mother had walked in on their own funeral, and their neighbours rushed to meet them once they heard the news, bringing food and clothes.
When we got to the village, they were so happy to see us,
And what about Arvind's father over in East Africa?
He discovered after a couple of weeks, he thought we have already died in the ship. He was mourning about it.
Did your mother ever say what it was like when she finally saw him in person again?
Oh, that was so emotional, and they were so happy to see us.
Despite the scale of the disaster, the sinking of the Tilawa was largely forgotten by the history books. But in 2022, 80 years on, a commemoration event was organised in Mumbai by relatives of those who died.
The grandchildren and children of Arvindbhai Jani are helping him pack for a special trip to India.
Don't get the passport.
He's taking part in a ceremony to remember what's known as the Indian Titanic.
The boat was sinking and then Dada survived.
Yeah, you know the story.
After the ship's sinking, a 14-year-old boy wrote a poem about losing his father in the disaster. At the ceremony in 2022, the British Deputy High Commissioner for Western India, Alan Gemmell, read out that poem.
My dad with stepmom and children 3 was sailing to Africa, full of glee. He smilingly said, I'll come back soon, but we knew not death would call so soon. Together then we'll live forever and ever. In heaven so beautiful, we shall part no never.
Today, Arvindbhai Jani lives in Britain, and Tej Mangat lives in the USA. They were speaking to me, Ben Henderson, for that episode of the Witness History podcast from the BBC World Service.